We have now come to the centerpiece of the foundational structure that we are building, and that is isomorphism and correspondence theorems. You start studying basic algebraic gadgets like groups, rings, vector spaces, and others, and rather early on, textbooks introduce these theorems. You see triangular diagrams like this, often with a right angle over here. It all may seem a bit too abstract, perhaps unnecessarily complicated. But the specific language is chosen because it is very useful, as we will see over and over again. In fact, more is true. With experience, one begins to appreciate that the specific formulation somehow captures the essence of the situation. So, this is the way. Today, I want to try to demystify the language for you and show you that it is really not that hard to learn and to use. So, we will try and dismantle the whole thing in all these cases and see that it is really based on only two elementary ingredients. The first is just basic set theory, and this is very general. The second one is built on the first one in the algebraic context. We'll start with the set theory part and we'll see how easy it is by looking at a non-technical example. We have an apartment building with residents staying in different apartments. S is the set of these residents. There are two independent pieces of data involving the set S. The first is an equivalence relation on S, where I consider two residents to be equivalent if they live in the same apartment. You should quickly observe that this is indeed an equivalence relation. Therefore, it partitions the set S into equivalence classes. The set of these equivalence classes is what I call the quotient of S by the given equivalence relation, and it is denoted this way. So notice that the quotient set has elements that are themselves sets. Okay. There is a natural map from S to the quotient set called the quotient map pi, and pi of x is just the equivalence class containing the resident x. So for example, pi of p is the set p comma q looking at this picture. Okay. The second piece of data involving the set S is some function f from S to some set t. And the question that I have is, when does the function f factor through the quotient set to give me a commutative diagram? We will see examples of this, but for now I would like you to formulate this question precisely in terms of existence, uniqueness, and properties of this map f bar. So please try this now. Okay, this diagram being commutative means f is the same map as pi followed by f bar. So asking for f bar means asking for existence of a map such that this equation holds, which is the same as this one written now in the element form. Okay, when such f bar exists, I often say that the map f factors through this quotient set. Such factoring problems are quite common in mathematics, even when this need not be a quotient map. Okay. After asking about existence of f bar, I can also ask whether it is unique, whether f bar is injective, which means one to one, and when f bar is surjective, which means onto. For such questions, it is useful to keep in mind that the quotient map pi itself is an onto map, which is indicated by means of this double arrow notation. Alright. Again, these questions might seem a bit abstract, but they really are not. And to convince you of this, I have given here three specific functions. So a of x is the apartment of x, and likewise for blood group and the floor. So please think of these questions for these three functions, and you will see that they are asking for something quite simple. So please do this now. Let's start with the last example. F of x is defined to be the floor on which x lives. We are tacitly assuming that this is well defined because no apartment is split between floors. The domain of f bar is supposed to be the set of equivalence classes, and the requirement states that f bar of the equivalence class of x must be the floor on which x lives. Therefore, f bar of any equivalence class must be the floor on which any member of that equivalence class lives. Now, f bar needs to be a function. Therefore, any given input must have a unique unambiguous output. This will happen precisely when all members of an equivalence class live on the same floor. Do they? And the answer is yes, because by definition they live in the same apartment and any given apartment is on a single floor. Okay, so f bar does exist. Is it unique? Well, this requirement forces f bar of any equivalence class uniquely, and therefore when f bar exists it is also unique. This particular f bar is not one-to-one because if you recall the picture, f bar of both of these equivalence classes is the top floor. Okay, f bar is onto precisely when f is onto, and this is because the quotient map is surjective. So the set of outputs of f and the set of outputs of f bar is exactly the same. In other words, they will both be onto in this case when no floor is unoccupied. Okay, now you should carry out similar analysis for the remaining two functions. I will discuss this quite quickly, so pause if necessary until you understand this example completely and transparently. So please do this now. We saw for a general f that when f bar exists, it is automatically unique, and in that case f bar is surjective precisely when f is surjective. So let's concentrate on the existence of f bar in these examples. The blood group function factors through the quotient set precisely when all residents of any apartment have the same blood group. This is quite unlikely, but if it does happen, then the existence of B bar captures something interesting about the situation. The apartment function does factor through the quotient set because all members of any equivalence class do live in the same apartment and vice versa. Therefore, not only does A bar exist, it is also injective. This may seem like cheating or perhaps circular reasoning, but it is not. Remember that the equivalence relation and the function are two separate pieces of data. So the question is, what about these two precisely is leading to the function A bar being injective? This may seem very pedantic. I will try to justify later why all of this is worthwhile. But for now, please humor me and try to answer this question as precisely as you can. Notice that there are two independently obtained partitions of the set S. The first is just equivalence classes of the given equivalence relation, and we have used that. The second is obtained by taking every element of the target set T and taking its inverse image under the given function f. These are called fibers of the function f. Notice that the fibers are mutually disjoint and they exhaust the set S. Next, observe that the function A bar exists and is injective precisely because in this situation the two partitions are exactly the same. This is a matter of just unwinding the words, but it is important that one should be comfortable with the language. Okay, next let's try to deal with the general case. Now, f is an arbitrary function between two sets, and we are also given an arbitrary equivalence relation on the source set. In this situation, you should again try to answer all of these questions precisely. For intuition, it is useful to keep this example in mind. And the two partitions will also come in handy. So please do this now. Okay, let's see the answers in general. We are given a function f from a set S to a set T and also an equivalence relation on S giving the quotient map. We want to know when a function f bar exists, making this diagram commutative. First observation, if f bar exists, then it is automatically unique. And in that case, f bar is surjective precisely when f is surjective because both functions have the same set of outputs. Next, f bar exists precisely when each equivalence class of the given equivalence relation is contained in a single fiber of the function f. This is just like saying that every apartment is contained in a single floor of the building. Finally, f bar is injective precisely when each equivalence class of the given equivalence relation is equal to a single fiber of the function f. Okay. In practice, often we know only partial information in this situation and we can use this web of interrelationships to get more information as we will see in examples. Alright, now suppose that f bar exists and is injective. In that case, I can factor f in the given fashion. First take the quotient map from S, follow it with the map f bar regarded as a map onto the image of f, followed by the inclusion of this image into the target set. It is easy to see that the composition of these three maps is exactly the given map f. Notice also that when regarded like this, the map f bar is both injective and surjective onto the image of f. In other words, it is an isomorphism of sets. And this is the reason for the name, the isomorphism theorem. This kind of formulation is particularly useful in the algebraic context. But before we get to that, let us observe some more symmetry in the given situation that has been lurking in the background until now. So recall that we are given two independent pieces of information. First, a function from the set S, and second, an equivalence relation on the set S. So I want you to observe that each of these two kinds of data can be used to define data of the other kind. In other words, given an equivalence relation on S, I can define a function from S and vice versa. So please try to make this explicit now. This is not difficult. Given an equivalence relation on S, we can define the quotient map from S which we have already used. Conversely, given a map F from S, we can define an equivalence relation by saying U is equivalent to V if they have the same image under F. You can quickly check that this is an equivalence relation, and in fact the equivalence classes are just the fibers of F. Okay, now the quotient map is always surjective, whereas a general map need not be. But if it is, then the situation becomes completely symmetric. Whatever be the case, the questions that we have answered are about compatibility of two independent but parallel sets of data. In the example that we saw about the apartment building, we started with an equivalence relation. But really it is the maps that are much more important. A person is known by the company he or she keeps. Similarly, a mathematical object is often better understood by looking at the maps to or from that object. So, let's spend a little more time talking about maps from this point of view. And we will use this to finally transition to the algebraic context. Take a function f. Suppose the source set is some kind of cloud sitting over a line representing the target set T. Think of the function f as projection. So the fiber over any point is just the part of the cloud sitting directly above it. Points that are not in the range have empty fiber over them. All the non-empty fibers together make the source set. So I can think of this set S as a bundle of fibers tied together by the function f. This is a very general viewpoint and can be used in many situations. For example, if S and T are geometric objects, then I can ask, as B varies, how do the fibers vary? I can also try to do counting with this idea. For example, the size of S is just the sum of sizes of all the fibers. For example, the class equation in group theory can be seen as an instance of this. Okay, but in our situation, it is much simpler. Suppose S and T are groups with F a group homomorphism. In this case, all non-empty fibers are uniform. What that means is that they can all be put in bijection with a special fiber, namely the kernel of F. This is not difficult, so please do this as an exercise. Take a group homomorphism F from group S to group T. I am denoting the group operation by plus, but not assuming it to be commutative here. K is the kernel of F. By definition, it is the fiber over 0. And remember that K is a normal subgroup. I claim that any two non-empty fibers of F are in bijection with each other, and I will show this by explicitly constructing a bijection between K and an arbitrary fiber F inverse of B. So let's take a point A over B, that is F of A is B, and the required bijection is now easily constructed by, in the forward direction, adding A, and in the backward direction by subtracting A, both on the same side. Okay, because in the forward direction I am adding A, the fiber F inverse of B is just the coset K plus A. Left or right doesn't matter because K is normal. Therefore, the fibers of F are precisely the cosets of the normal subgroup K. Alright, let's put this on the side for now and independently take a normal subgroup L of the source group S. As usual, I have an equivalence relation on S because of L. So, I am in the usual situation where I have a map and a quotient map. I can ask about the existence of F bar. You should recall the earlier criterion and see what it means in this case and deduce the isomorphism theorem for groups. You will see that because of uniformity of fibers, the statement becomes much simpler. So please do this now. Remember that for F bar to exist, every equivalence class needs to be contained in a single fiber. But equivalence classes are just the cosets of the normal subgroup L. And in fact, the quotient set is the same thing as the quotient group. And the quotient map is a group homomorphism. Also, X is contained in both of these cosets. Therefore, this condition will hold if and only if L is contained in the kernel K. You see this just by adding X to both sides. Okay, so we are now ready to write down the isomorphism theorem for groups, but also for vector spaces and rings, because the argument stays exactly the same. So you should do all of these things now. All we have to do is gather the fruits of our labor. I have listed here the steps for all four cases, but I will not repeat the set theoretic statements. First, given a homomorphism, I will just say morphism of groups, vector spaces or rings, I take the kernel to get an appropriate substructure, namely a normal subgroup, a subspace or a two-sided ideal. I just have to check the required closure properties. Conversely, given a requisite substructure I of an object S, I get the quotient object S mod I and the quotient homomorphism pi. You have already seen this for groups and for vector spaces, and we check this for rings. Finally, I have the statement of the isomorphism theorem. So, please try to understand it, justify it, and fix it in your mind. Okay, let's do this. Given a morphism F and a quotient morphism to S mod I, F bar like this exists precisely when I is contained in the kernel of F, and F bar is injective precisely when I is equal to the kernel of F. On the last board, I use the letter L instead of I. Keep in mind carefully which way the inclusion goes. The example of the apartment building may help. In fact, what I tried to do here was to show that this whole thing really comes from only set theory, with the simplification obtained in these conditions coming from uniformity of fibers. Okay, this last corollary is frequently used and is also called the first isomorphism theorem. But you need to know this entire statement with ease. Alright, now we will go on to correspondence theorems. So please try to work out the set theory part, starting with a surjective map of sets. We start with a surjective morphism, for now just between sets. We want to prove a bijective correspondence between subsets of the source and subsets of the target. It makes sense to require F to be surjective because F does not see anything outside its image. If I start with a subset of the source, then F of that is a subset of the target. And if I take a subset of the target, then F inverse of that is a subset of the source. Let us see to what extent these procedures are inverses of each other. If I start with a subset Y of the target, take F inverse of that, and then take F of F inverse of Y, I get Y back because F is surjective. However, if I start with a subset X here, then take F of X and take F inverse of F of X, then I get something more interesting. So please try to work out what that is. To help you, I have given an example here where you should think of the function F as projection. F of X is going to be some set of points in the target. F inverse of any one of those points is going to be a full fiber of F that has something in common with X. Therefore, F inverse of F of X is the union of those fibers of F that have something in common with X. Therefore, I do get a bijection if I restrict to those subsets of S that are unions of fibers of the function F. Such sets are in bijective correspondence with all subsets of the target. Okay, next, when F is a surjective homomorphism of some algebraic structure, I want to get a correspondence of substructures of S and of T. Also, the condition star should simplify in this case because of uniformity of fibers. So try to find out all correspondences that you can in these situations and write them down carefully. Again, let's gather the fruits of our set theoretic effort. If F is a surjective homomorphism of groups, then I claim that I get a bijective correspondence between certain subgroups of S and subgroups of T, and also one between respective normal subgroups. If these are vector spaces, then I get a correspondence between subspaces. And if these are rings, then I get a similar correspondence between subrings and also one between ideals. Precisely, I have a bijective correspondence between all substructures of the target and substructures of the source of the same kind that contain the kernel of F. I already know that F and F inverse give inverse bijections between all subsets of T and all subsets of S that meet the condition star. So, to prove the correspondence for substructures, I just have to prove the following. 1. A subgroup of S containing the kernel is equivalent to the condition star for that subgroup. In other words, that subgroup being a union of fibers of F. This is true simply because any group is a union of cosets of any of its subgroups. Next, I need to check that F and F inverse respect the substructure that I have in mind. This is straightforward in most cases. In two cases, I have to be a little bit careful. To say that F of a normal subgroup here is a normal subgroup and F of an ideal here is an ideal here, I should note that F is a surjective homomorphism. So please check this for yourself now. Finally, let us see the theorems in action. Because F is a surjective morphism, it induces an isomorphism from S modulo the kernel of F to T. Therefore, in the correspondence theorem, I can replace T by the isomorphic object S mod kernel of F and replace F by the equivalent quotient map. This is the situation one often encounters in practice. Here, I have taken the quotient of a group by a normal subgroup N. The correspondence is now between subgroups of G containing the kernel of this map, which is N, and subgroups of the quotient group G mod N. Let's take an arbitrary subgroup H of G. H need not meet this description and therefore may not be a part of this correspondence. Still, the image of H under pi is a subgroup on the right hand side and so is part of this correspondence. Therefore, it will have a partner. What I want you to do is to explicitly describe pi of H and its partner. Also, apply the first isomorphism theorem to the quotient map restricted to H. For this, you will have to find out the kernel of this restricted map. So please do this now. The image of H under the quotient map consists of all cosets of the elements of H, and therefore the inverse image of that is the union of all of these cosets, which is capital H times N. These two are partners under this correspondence, but the partner of Hn is its image under pi, and because Hn contains N, the image of Hn is the quotient Hn mod N. Therefore, pi of H is equal to Hn mod N. Therefore, when restricted to H, the image of pi is Hn mod N. Now, I can apply the first isomorphism theorem to this surjection, just as I did to F. To do that, I need to identify the kernel of this map. The kernel of pi is the normal subgroup N. Therefore, when restricted to H, the kernel is just the intersection of H and N. Therefore, by the first isomorphism theorem, H modulo this kernel is isomorphic to the image Hn mod N. To appreciate how cleanly this came about, you should try to define by hand the map in the opposite direction, and you will see that it is messier. Okay, this isomorphism is called the second isomorphism theorem. There are analogues of this in other situations. I have written here the analog for subspaces of a vector space. A way to remember this isomorphism from right to left is to see that W is killed on the left hand side and therefore it does not occur on the top on the right hand side. As an exercise for yourself, you should figure out the versions of the second isomorphism theorem for rings and ideals. And yes, there is a third isomorphism theorem also. We will see that briefly. We are given a group G with normal subgroups N and K with K containing N. I claim that G mod K is isomorphic to G mod N mod K mod N. A way to remember this is to think of this as an ordinary ratio and then N just cancels out. I will prove this by using a common strategy. To show that X mod Y is isomorphic to Z, I try to find a surjective morphism from X to Z and show that the kernel is Y, because I can then apply the first isomorphism theorem. In this case, I want X to be G and Y to be K. I start with the quotient map from G to G mod N and follow it with quotient by K mod N. It is easy to check that the kernel of this composite map is indeed K. Also, the composite map is surjective because both of these maps are surjective. So, our strategy works. There is a little more to say because I should understand that all these quotients indeed make sense, in particular this one. I can check this by hand, but it is more conceptual to use the correspondence theorem which I have done over here. Okay. This exact same statement continues to be true for vector spaces, rings and ideals. I just have to change the hypothesis appropriately. So you can check this for yourself. This was a long story. Unfortunately, the abstraction could not be avoided. But the ability to use the two main theorems is much more important than their proofs. I assure you that with repeated use, you will be able to exploit these theorems like a screwdriver or a spanner. Nifty but quite routine. So, practice, 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 and then you will be able to carry out arguments like this in your sleep.